I walked into a store and bought this because I still can. It was overdue. This is Stud Welder. It welds studs. It's a big yellow thing with one button on the back. It comes with two different size collets for two different size studs and a self-locking slide hammer for pulling on them. The way it works is you first have to plug it in, very important. Then you take this pin and you put it in the collet. The collet's spring-loaded and you have to press that in with the stud in it against clean metal and press the button on the back. It goes bzzzt. Should stick this thing to the metals. Then we'll pretend that it's stuck to something and you take your slide hammer and envelop the stud with it until it's passed. Now I'm going to call it the teeth wheel. It's like a spiky cam gear, and when you pull on the stud, it bites and locks in. Looks to be a carbon steel part, not too bad. You got to give yourself plenty of room past the teeth. Only advice for the noob is don't choke all the way up on the stud before you lock the teeth wheel in place because you'll get it stuck. If you can't operate this, don't use the other thing. I'm going to show all of you with 100 quatloos how to relieve yourself of a guilt-laden event that you caused all by yourself with a center post lift because you were lazy that day. That's right, ladies and gents, I did this. No, I didn't hit anything. This is what operator error looks like, all caused by a 27-year-old IT guy who had no business under it. But it's a small price to pay if it can undo that past transgression. It's a spot welder. You complete the circuit when you compress the stud inside the spring-loaded collet until the outer ring on the tool touches metal. So it's important to grind through the paint, and I just use a tiny flap wheel to waste my own time. Really, it's not a bad choice. I'm using it because it reaches into tighter crumpled spots than a big flat 3M sanding disc on a die grinder does. And these are the spots where I'll be needing to stick some of these things. Before I started, I already removed some of the undercoating, but it only takes a thin layer of paint or primer to keep the stud welder from completing the circuit and firing off. Let's slow it all down now. The length of time it takes to stick a stud on there depends on the stud diameter that you're using, the thickness of the material, the quality of your prep work, and the resistance properties of the material that you're welding the stud to. It typically only takes a second or two to make a good weld. Your weld just has to provide enough grip so that you can reverse beat on it with a slide hammer. Operate the teeth wheel lock with your thumb to get it out of the way of the stud, then put the chuck about 1/8 of an inch or so below the weld, touch the wheel to press it against the stud, and pull on the slide hammer to set the teeth into the stud and lock it in. Watch what you're doing and do the slide hammer thing. It really is this boring at normal speed now. Let's do the next 5 hours in only 10 minutes. It's only right if I ensure that the first 4 of these things that I ever do, should be in the wrong place. I'm going to demonstrate the results of pulling from the edges versus the middle of a dent like this next. There are times for each, but the bottom of this thing bent as a result of what got crushed the worst. So it's not usually the middle of the part that was previously flat where you should start. Starting in the middle here might spread the edges out as you pull on it, sure. It'll leave you with more to fix later though. You'll get to see the difference between pulling from the inside versus the outside very soon. I've got 2 sides to fix. For best results, find all the stuff that's crushed the worst and start there, where the damage happened. And pull it in the direction that the damage occurred in, because that's the spot that pulled everything else out of shape in the first place. By putting that back into the right spot, it's going to pull out most of the surrounding damage with it. Next, find all your edges and pull those into shape. It's after that stage that pulling on the stuff that's supposed to be flat will be the most benefit to your efforts. Do your edges first. Steel's forgiving. It's the best material to practice on no matter what kind of welding you're doing, and I obviously trust myself a lot to take this job on myself with the GSX for the first time I ever do this. These parts were screwed up already, so there's really no right or wrong way for me to be doing any of this. I have nothing to lose. People talk about metal memory, and I won't. It has it, but so what? Prove it, I say. If it can't convert that memory into muscle and put itself back into shape, then what good is all that memory? It's useless without getting me involved, you know? Why should it get all the credit here? A slide hammer is a hammer that pulls instead of pushes, and there's plenty of reasons why, when you're shaping metal, that you should use both. When it got crushed, these side edges got rolled out, and a slide hammer isn't going to fix all of that all by itself. One of these hammers is helping the other one be more effective just without the welding. Once I can get both sides of this pulled back and beat into shape and straight again, the rest of what needs to be done on the bottom gets really obvious. These studs will often pull out of the metal, leaving a tiny little hole that you'd need to fill. But it's better when you can cut them off instead, because that's a hole you don't have to fill. It's going to happen, so just accept it. When you cut the stud, it's going to add material to the part that you'll need to grind away, but if you don't have a welder, not leaving the hole is a bonus of being able to cut them off, you know? That's why that method's better. Sometimes it's possible to twist them slightly and they make no hole at all. But I've got a trick for how to deal with the pinholes, and I'll show it to you in a minute. This side was definitely crushed the worst. This was the heaviest side of the car, so that's not weird. The lift got set more than once before the damage was noticed, and that left me with several more crush points to have to pull out here that's, you know, than on the lighter side, on the passenger side. You can see all the bumps and the pinholes this leaves that have to be dealt with. Using this style puller means that you'll have to employ plenty of other kinds of tools and processes after this to get to your final product. It's not like it's going to be painted when I'm done. My goal in this video is to just get this into a state where I don't need these tools anymore. This is just the straightening part. This side is an example of pulling from the center to affect all the sides of the damage first. The next example is going to be what happens when you pull from the worst crushed parts first. But I haven't cleaned off any of the undercoating paint or primer here yet, and that's fairly easy to do. It just takes some time and it's messy. The easiest way to remove large quantities of it is a torch or a heat gun to soften it up so you can easily scrape it away. It's hard to do when it's cold. Unless you have liquid nitrogen and a hammer, then it's really easy, but for most people, just keep the torch at a small distance away and, you know, it's easy enough to scrape off. I followed it up with 2+2 in a rag because it dissolves and removes everything left stuck on the surface. And now I'll show you what I mean about the prep. First, I put 2 studs in the worst crushed spots here up front, and then here in the spot right behind it that I couldn't prep. This is what happens when your prep is weak. It doesn't light off. You really need to sand down to bare metal for best results because surface contamination on the weld means it's not going to stick very well and you're more likely to make a pinhole than move that metal with that stud. Since we just started working on this side, I haven't used the smashy hammer yet, but after pulling the worst parts out a good bit, let's take a close-up look at the damage I still need to fix. When the lift arm crushed the rail, it mushroomed outwards, leaving a funky shape. The sides are almost straight in most places, but that mushroom effect is going to require both hammers to fix. I'm going to weld the studs onto the bottom of it and help the slide hammer do its job by assisting the bulges from the side with the smashy hammer. If I weld them in the right place, I should be able to pull the right radius right back into shape that it used to have. In some places where you can see the original corners, you can weld right to those, but where the edge is lost, I just need to start about a centimeter away to give it room to return to its original shape. After you've got your edges pulled out pretty good, now this is where you benefit from pulling on the flatter stuff. Most of it's close to where it needs to be, and only a few of the worst spots still show deformities. The difference between the way we did it the first time and this method is how many of the studs you wind up having to use to do the exact same thing. The more studs you use, the more pinholes and cleanup you have to do. But know that while you're creating them, that they're not mistakes. They'll just go with the territory. It's not just a pinhole though. The stud melts new material all the way around where it left the hole. The two fuse together, and if you were aggressive pulling on it with a slide hammer, then you may have stretched a bump into it too. If you end up with high spots that protrude from everything else that's around it, you know, it's higher than where it's supposed to be, then beat those back down and then pull the low spots out. This is what I meant by steel is forgiving. If you don't get it perfect, you can always make it better by spending more time on it. A lot of materials aren't that kind to you. Everything's pretty bumpy right now from all the welding and hammering, and the way I like to do my quality control is by going and doing the back end cleanup. Stop snickering. I mean, grinding down all the bumps and using the so-called pointy end of the body hammer on all the places that I pulled from. This is something that I do for 2 reasons. We stress the part on these points, pulling on it, so I'm stress relieving it. Also, if the material is thin, I want to dent it inwards because grinding this with a sanding disc will grind that material thinner, potentially making a hole if it's bulging out towards me. If some deformation of the part surrounding those areas where I'm hammering moves, then I don't care. This is just my first cleanup to see how wrinkled and deformed it really still is. It's easier to see what's out of place if you can get the surface looking more uniform first. Then all the bumps and blemishes stand right out. What this step typically reveals is where I need to spend more of my time, and I did a few more little things here before moving back over to the other side that still needs the same sort of love. We'll do that, and then we'll call this part round 1. How many rounds do you have to go? As many as it takes before your opponent loses. That's how many. You don't have to be good at this. You just have to be tough enough to endure however many rounds it's going to go is all. And what I like about doing this is the immediate satisfaction of the cause and effect, seeing my efforts change things. It's a gradual improvement from the minute you start working on this stuff until it ends. I've done body work before, but I've never had the luxury of using one of these stud welders before, and I love it. Here's the other bumpy side that hasn't yet received its de-stressing or cleanup. Lots more pimples to grind off because pulling from the center takes more effort than pulling from the crushed edges. I broke off more studs doing it this way, created more of a buildup of excess stud material, and made lots of holes. So many that I've chosen to use a flat-faced punch to direct my hammer blows only on the places that I spot welded. This did all kinds of surrounding metal deformation as I knocked those back down, but like I said, who cares? This is still round one. It's just a different opponent. The camera battery died on me right after my memory card changed, and I missed about a half hour of rinse repeat, pulling a few spots out on both sides and grinding them all down again. Once all the excess stud material was removed from both sides, this is what I was left with. Here's the passenger side. I think this turned out incredibly well. You can clearly see all the pinholes from the material that the studs robbed when they popped out. I've already reamed them all out with a spring-loaded punch for what they're about to get next. Twice as many over here because of my approach to the early portion of this job on this side. I told you we've got a trick for those. Body filler is not spackling putty, and this is not my living room. I want to put metal back in that hole. Not everyone is lucky enough to have access to a TIG or MIG welder. I have both, but I'm not going to use either one for this repair. Forget all the protective gear or welding upside down or shielding gases or any of that. If you bought this tool and you're watching this video trying to figure out what to do about the pinholes, you already bought the tool that can fix it. This is a spot welder. It uses electricity and current to fuse metal. The studs you weld on here to pull dents out with are blunt and they sit on the surface, but if you sharpen the ends into a point on a bench grinder instead of welding them onto the surface, then you can insert it into the hole and fuse that hole shut. You just need a little lip or a protrusion on the end so that it doesn't fall inside the collet. It still makes good electrical contact with all of it. The smaller studs will work best for this. Same process, but without the slide hammer. Weld the studs in, cut them off, and grind off all the metal. Make it smooth. No more holes. Rinse, repeat. However many times for however many holes you made. This is going to blow through your supply of slide hammer studs, but it's a cheap alternative to put metal in these holes without using shielding gas, welding helmets, gloves, or an expensive welder. Thought you'd like to know that. Of course, along the way of filling the holes, you can still use the slide hammer here and there to fix distortions you create during the cleanup with the smashy hammer, but you know that you'll more easily pull these studs out than you will the blunt ones. Be careful not to make a bigger hole is all. There's so many holes on this side that it's taking multiple passes, filling up as many as I can, grinding them down just to make room to weld more of them in here. Back to the normal dent pulling again to fix what my cleanup revealed. I've watched others review this tool, and they all left this little off-label use for filling pinholes out. You can use these studs as filler rods, you just have to modify them first. They're steel, so you're putting steel back into the hole. Quite frankly, it does a better job, easier than welding upside down in a welding helmet. It just looks less fancy, but it does the exact same thing if you do your prep correctly. But all in all, this tool costs $100 to add to my arsenal, and it let me undo a 20-year-old transgression. It's a gearhead's way of telling his car that he's sorry. That's probably the biggest bonus for me. Once all this gets skinned, sanded, painted, and undercoated, it's going to look as good as new, and it fixes one of the only and the largest of blemishes on this entire chassis. Let's fill these holes in the passenger side and give it its second round too. Before I start filling the holes though, there's a few spots that still didn't look quite right, and I'm going to fix those. I'm going to pull those out first. Periodically walk around your part, checking the lines from multiple angles. You'll see how the worst parts stand out the loudest. Address those, and then do it again. To recap, starting from the initial impact point, fix that, then do the next worst part. That's how you should approach this entire job. Don't pull from the center of where you found all your damage. Instead, pull from the crush point itself, the thing that's the most out of alignment. Get your edges straight, and then pull from the center after you've got that. Always from the direction of the impact. Then smooth it out and address the details. Fill your holes with the metal instead of spackling putty, and repeat the process until you get your parts to a point where you can just use body filler or a high build primer to do the rest for you. Don't expect this tool to make it look like it did before you mangled it. It's not going to make anything perfect. All you'll be able to do is get it really close. The longer you spend with it, the closer you'll be able to get everything, but it's the processes that follow that ultimately will make all this kind of work disappear. I just wanted to show you how I fixed this damage, and that this tool not only does the bulk of the heavy lifting on a job like this, it even does some of the cleanup too. It pulls dents and it fills holes. It's a bargain compared to what paying a body tech would cost for the same kind of work, but you'll have to do all of that work as good as they'll do it for it to ever be a fair comparison. If you've got something like this on your car that's your fault, burning a hole in your brain, you have the aptitude for working on sheet metal, $100 burning a hole in your pocket, and if you feel comfortable doing this kind of work, well, then I say go for it. Give it a shot. I only say this because I know for a fact how good it feels to fix something that was my fault. It's not perfect, but it's better, and I probably get back a ½ inch of footwell space that I lost. Space that I'm likely going to need on the driver's side for another mod that I've got coming soon to this car, because the pedals are right above this. My size 12s thank me. But there you have it. Tell me what you think. Not bad? Put primer on this soon, of course. There's so many other things that I have to do under here before I can paint or finish this that are not even related to this repair or even going to be done by yours truly, so I'm just going to break. I really enjoyed this quick video, unlike most of them. If you did too, then hit that like button. Likes are free, they cost nothing. And to show my appreciation for all they do, this is a free unsponsored video for my Patreons too. I just wanted to put this short video out there and thank all of you for giving me so much love and support over the past 14 years and counting. Wheels are turning, things are happening, but until next time, stay tuned.